Great to have you here today, Josh, to be joining us in this session. I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing at the Audio Programmer, and obviously at Sxratch we just launched our own audio application somewhat, and we are also looking into the VST plugin space as well. So it's kind of where there's some kind of overlap, and possibly in the future we can collaborate together as well. But maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing and kind of what the Audio Programmer stands for.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for having me. So the Audio Programmer started off as a YouTube page in 2017. So what happened was I come from a DJ background, from a DMC and international open format DJing background. And in 2015, I went to university to learn how to do coding, specifically for creative applications and music programming. And during that time, I started learning about audio programming. So believe it or not, these programs like Serato and Tractor and Ableton actually have people behind the scenes that are actually making all of these amazing things. And unfortunately, up until a couple of years ago, nobody really knew who these people were. They didn't really have any type of public, many of them didn't have much of a public profile. They were very difficult to find. And this was one of the challenges that I had when I first started getting into audio programming. I was wondering, where are these people? How can you meet people who make VSTs and who make plugins and things like this? So when I was thrown into this world of audio programming, it just opened this new, all of these things that I was completely aware of, even music and audio and different contexts that were other than music, things like art installations using sound and things like that. So I was very fascinated by this. And what happened was in 2017, I had started my own YouTube page called The Audio Programmer, just as a way to start teaching myself how to start making my own plugins, make my own audio applications. And I thought, in order to keep myself disciplined to do this on a continual basis, I would do a tutorial a week to teach people as I was learning it myself. And I didn't expect it to really catch on. I was really just doing it to teach myself, but a whole community formed out of this. And long story short, over the span of 3 or 4 years since I created the YouTube page, it's grown into one of the largest audio development communities on the web. And I've worked with nearly every reputable music tech company at one point or another, on small scale, big scale, sometimes doing events, sometimes doing recruiting, sometimes consulting for them myself. And we have 3 parts to our company. So we have the community part, which is where we have tutorials that we still do, and monthly meetups where we have people who come in and talk about their thoughts on audio development. We have a development side of the company where we develop audio plugins and apps for clients. And we have a recruitment, contracting, and consulting part of the company where we actually help companies find the right audio developers and contract developers out to other businesses.
Yep. That's quite a result out of if you just mentioned you started a couple of years ago in the grand scheme of things, and now you are where you're at. So that's quite impressive.
Thanks a lot. Yeah,
it's really crazy.
I find this
especially
you're telling me.
Sorry.
That's okay. I was going to say it's really great that you've brought together a community, because I found with trying to find information about audio programming, you're doing a lot of soul searching, and you've created a nice sort of platform that that everyone's encouraged to learn, and everyone enjoys sharing ideas and knowledge.
Thank you very much. I think that one of the big things that happened, so I think the original platform that I could give props to that came before the Audio Programmer was actually the Audio Developer Conference, which was a once a year event that happened, that still happens in London, and I've actually been a part of that event for the past 3 years. But as a student, I went to the Audio Developer Conference in 2017 for the first time, and one thing that I saw there was that it was mainly professionals that were going to this conference. There weren't any resources or places for people who were just trying to get into audio programming and trying to learn to get together and to communicate and ask each other questions and things like that. And I found that just generally in the programming world, there was this slightly elitist type of stance that many developers would take when newcomers would come in asking questions. People would say, well, why you're supposed to know this, or you need to go back and you need to study your C++, you need to study fundamentals of audio development and things like that. Problem is that there are some things that you can't, that are just very difficult to know or impossible to know until somebody actually tells you and teaches it to you. It kind of reminds me of what it must have been like in the 70s and 80s with music studios. There were certain techniques that people were doing, like if you think of the Phil Collins snare drum, the famous air snare drum and things like that would be probably very difficult to figure out unless somebody actually showed you, like a concept like parallel compression, for example. You look on YouTube now, it's like there are a million tutorials on parallel compression, but back in the 80s, there's no way that you would have been able to figure that out on your own unless somebody told you.
Sure.
Yeah. So, that's a really great example. Actually, I saw some kind of, I think it was a video clip, like maybe 10, 12 minutes something, but it was exactly around this, 80s snare and how they actually discovered that compression effect with some kind of microphone that was hanging from the ceiling, and they were trying to pick up vocals, but they picked up the snare drum, and then it got really compressed, and they got this typical 80s snare. And then it kind of became a thing, but it was a video only about that. I thought it was super fascinating how they discovered it, and then it became this sign of the times. Yeah, but to your point around kind of audio programming, so I somewhat we have a lot of similarities, I think, in background. First of all, you're also a turntablist yourself. So you kind of have this DJing background, like three of us as well. And myself, I've been coding since 2013-ish, like in JavaScript, starting with that, and then going into Arduinos, and then ultimately C++ as well. I've dabbled in assembler actually, really back in the day, like end of 80s, early 90s. And back then, I kind of got the impression that, wow, if you can do this, then you're super smart, and you need to know all these things. It's totally... it's sort of out of my reach. But then I realized when I got back into this again, just a couple of years back as well, that, nowadays it's really, if you have a mindset and there's all these libraries and kind of helping tools, and of course nowadays there's the internet where you can find stuff, you can really, get started on your own if you have an idea and you can start with it. Having said that, what do you think is, in terms of audio programming as a whole, where if people are trying to get into it, or they think, hey, maybe I could be, if I want to learn that, what kind of language is sort of, let's say, the go-to, in your opinion, at this point? What's kind of the easiest to start with, or where's the least maybe bottlenecks or boundaries to get started?
Well, when people say audio programming, that can mean a couple different things, right? So that could mean an audio plugin, or a audio application, something like Serato, but it could also mean something like a creative application. Like I said, some people do things like instrument augmentation, where they take a guitar or they take their French horn and they maybe create a bespoke application that focuses just on extending the functionality of the instrument. And if the intention is just to create an application that needs to work on one computer, and that is something that is just for you for performance, then you could probably start off with something like Max MSP. Max MSP is a great language to get started with, and I think that it's great for teaching the fundamentals. If you're looking at VST development or audio plugin development, then the traditional route is still C++. Ultimately the road leads to C++. I don't know if I would advise that as a first language. I think I think that there are a lot of, well, first of all, it's a huge language. It's a huge language, and if you look, and it's always updating. So people even have different opinions on what best practices are and like what the standards are. So,
sure.
You find things that are out of date or things that aren't recommended anymore. I actually think, for me personally, looking back, and probably easier for me to say this looking back now, C++, like the very basics of it, aren't very different from learning something like Java or other languages. I don't really think that it's really all that different. Mm-hmm. It's just that there are more opportunities to make mistakes than there are in other programming languages. And especially when you start getting into larger applications, things like VSTs, audio apps, you have normally some part of your application that's doing audio processing. You have another part of your app that's doing some type of, that's showing the user interface to the user. Mm-hmm. So what the user sees. And I think a lot of the difficulty around understanding this really is involved in understanding how to keep those two things in sync with what the user sees and what is actually happening in the audio processing, and ensuring that those things aren't out of sync. And luckily, frameworks like Juice do a great job of trying to abstract a lot of that out. So they have built-in classes that actually help to keep those things in sync.
Excellent. Your channel focuses quite a bit on tutorials based around Juice. Are you able to tell us more about what Juice is, or what Juice does for our viewers at home?
Sure. So before Juice, still now, you have different plugin formats, right? So a lot of people probably don't know that you have like the VST format, you have the audio unit format, AU format, or what some people would call like a component format. You have the AAX format, which is like a Pro Tools format, and those are three formats that are described that are created to do essentially the same thing, right? But you have three different formats, and then you have different operating systems. So you have the Windows operating system and Mac operating system, and Linux, if you want to think about Linux. So you have three different operating systems, three different plugin formats, right? Now, if you're building a plugin before Juice, you would have had to do those things separately. So you would have had to do VST for Windows, VST for Mac, audio unit is only Apple, so audio unit for Apple. Then you have AAX for Windows, AAX for Mac. What Juice does is that it basically abstracts all of this stuff out. So you could basically say, okay, I'm going to write my code once, and there are going to be some things that are going to be different between Windows and Mac. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it takes all of those things and abstracts that out and says, okay, if you want to build a component and a VST, you could do that all by just hitting one button, and for the most part, that will work. And you can do it cross-platform as well. So, So you could basically say, so the idea is that you could build it for Windows and Mac, all with the click of a button, rather than having to do all of these things individually. Mm-hmm. So that is really the core of what the benefit of using Juice is, because also Windows and Mac also have different ways of interacting with audio, right? So you have core audio that is on Mac, and then you have like ASIO on Windows, for example. those have their own ways of interacting with the audio buffers to get the sound out of your speakers. So it abstracts all of that out as well. Then on top of that, you have a lot of just utility classes, different tools that you can use that make things that would normally take a lot of time to do in just in core C++, or possibly years in C++, and it abstracts those out. So you have like a UI kit. So if you want like sliders, dials, windows, displays for your audio signal, it actually does that, and it takes all of that, and you have classes to use that. Now you have to know C++ to actually be able to use those classes. So it's not just like Legos, but if you have the experience, then it's much easier than trying to do that from scratch.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good point, right? So I think Juice does that for, let's say, VSTs or audio components. So all those different formats. And there's also one thing I found, that basically, as a, let's say, developer or programmer, you don't necessarily need to know everything and every single kind of element within the language. Like C++, for instance. You just need to know what's possible and which libraries actually allow you to do that, and then you can use those to do certain things. But you raise a really good point about that Juice also has this UI components, because I think what you tend to see is that some people who might be really good with with mathematics and those kind of things, and they can apply that to, let's say, audio processing. They might know exactly how to do certain things and generate certain values, and then as a result effects, for instance, or kind of other techniques. But they're really bad in UX and UI. So they, so what I've seen, at least in the past, you get a VST somewhere and it does something really cool, but how it works and the buttons are just super ugly, and it's really you're not really sure what does, and really basic. And I think for most end users also, especially nowadays, the way it looks also needs to be sort of what they expect from sort of a modern interface. And Juice also allows you to do that, right? So it has those components in there, so you don't need to worry about that. So you can really focus on your idea and basically do that, because that's also a part of programming. You need to do essentially everything. So it needs to do, let's say, the audio processing, but you also need to have a UI that interacts with the user. And then maybe you need to have copy protection or something like this as well. So there's all these different elements which, as a, let's say, maybe starting developer, you might or might not want to actually deal with, because that takes time. And then, it's maybe not so much fun or what you want to be doing.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is that one thing that I think Juice offers is, like you were saying, a solution in one package. And there are other tools that have been coming out for building the UI faster, for instance, with JavaScript and other solutions that come out that involve using using Juice for audio processing, using a different language for displaying the UI and things like that. But the thing about that is that, as a person that maybe you're a business and you're employing somebody, well, now you either have to have one developer that knows two languages, or you have to have two developers that know one language to do each one of those parts individually. So the more that you mix and match different things, even though there may be certain advantages to doing those parts in that particular language, the more complex your organization is going to be. Sure. So I think Juice and C++ in general has disadvantages. It's very difficult to prototype something quickly because you have long build times, especially as the application gets bigger. For things like UIs, that makes it very tough to iterate over those and move something a couple pixels over, because you have to go through the whole build process again and things like that. But in terms of having one solution, one unified solution, I think it's tough to beat. I like simplicity, streamlined behavior personally, and I think that it's quite effective for that.
I would like to know from you, what was the most amazing VST which came out, I don't know, or the last 10 years, because my personal feeling is some VST are actually the same, but just with another design, or another advertising strategy or something like that. Is there something which really has an impact on you? So how, regarding the idea behind that, or how it could influence music in general? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that if you look at the beginning of VSTs, pardon me, in the late 90s and then into the 2010s, a lot of them focused on being one-stop solutions, right? So if you look at a synthesizer like Massive, for instance, it wanted to be so many different things, and for the user, it can be quite complex because that synthesizer is designed to be a one-stop shop for everything. And I think that what I really liked was this change that went more towards bespoke tools that were designed to do one sound or to do one thing and do that one thing well. Yeah. I think when I think about something that's a game changer and just something that new that has probably changed the game in terms of what serious plug-in developers and plug-in companies are going to do in the future, I think about like Arcade by Output, which they use Juice for their audio processing, but then they also employ JavaScript. They also have a subscription service, which I think is something that's very effective against things like pirating, which for a lot of VST plugins, over 90 to 95% of plugins that are out there that people are using are actually pirated. They aren't actually legitimately purchased plugins. So they've become almost like the Netflix of plugin development, in that you want to offer a low-cost solution where somebody says, I would rather pay $10 for that rather than going through the song and dance of trying to pirate it and do it that way. Sure. And also that continuous interaction with the client as well, I think is very important, because what they're doing is, rather than putting a product out and then that being the end of the customer-company relationship, what they do is they're continually putting out content, and there's always this feeling of something new is happening, something new is coming out, there's this continuous communication, continuous value that the company is delivering to the customer. And so in terms of that, I think that they're effective, but also they aren't trying to be everything. So like if you look at Arcade, it's primarily a loop player. It's not up until recently. I mean, they've come out with their new with an update to the plugin recently, which changes this. But up until very recently, it was, we want to make music very easy. It's four sliders or four parameters that you can control, and we're not intending to make every sound, or we don't.
That's great. Yeah.
You want to make it. Really, they're very in tune with how people nowadays are making music. They want to go quick. Everything is quick. Yeah. And I think that they really caught on to something with that.
Yeah, because that's really the point. I think a lot of VST are so advanced in terms of the possibilities or what you can do with it, but you have to dig in, you have to really spend time to find out all the different functionalities and stuff like that. But I also think the future is really make music affordable instantly, no matter what type of skills you have. And that's why I find also, do you know Scalar, for example? Scalar, yeah. VST. I love it, I love it, because I'm not so experienced in terms of harmonics and chords, playing chords and finding harmonics and stuff like that. And this is really easy to use, and this is also the future. But the question is that a lot of people complain about that, traditional musicians, for example, that they say, oh, you are not experienced playing harmonics, and now you use this fucking VST tools which does everything for you. There's a lack of musicality, but the same applies also for function in DJing. Sync function, for example, the sync button. It's another great thing, but from my personal point of view, it's helpful and it attracts people to make music, and that should be always the goal.
Oh yeah, the same when the drum computers were being kind of more mainstream, beginning of the 80s, end of the 70s, sort of. I mean, I wasn't really around there. I was still young and beautiful back then, but it's. I can imagine that a lot of musicians back then were saying that you have a computer making your drum backing track. That's that's crap,
exactly.
And so there will always be people who will complain about innovation and things like that. But I also totally agree that lowering sort of the threshold of becoming creative, not needing to know musical theory to make kind of great sounding music in a way. Ultimately, it's only up to the beholder who listens to it, who will say, "Hey, this is a great piece of music." I mean, if you sort of analyze all of the, the popular music nowadays, there's not really that much distinction in terms of chord progressions and stuff. Certain things just sound okay, and people tend to like that, and that's what becomes popular. So then, you can also complain about that, of course. So it's I definitely agree with that in a way. What Josh is saying about the simplicity. So keep it simple, but do that really well, and then at the same time allowing people to be more creative. And that's actually what we are trying to also have as a mindset. In general, we with the things that we are having as ideas, and hopefully at some point also will develop. And actually, if you think about business design, that's also one of these core kind of lean principles, right? So you don't make a product that can do 1,000 things. Make something that's really solves a problem. And not something that you think that will solve it, but ask your customers. So make something, ask them, how is this working? And then even remove stuff that they don't use. So really keep it simple and lean, and do that one thing really, really well. And then, people will start to take notice, and then you can build a brand around that.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it comes to such an sophisticated playing art form such as turntablism, and where you really have to spend a lot of time and training to perform these fader gestures, this gestures on the vinyls, and now due to the fade application, it's possible actually for everyone to create a 2-click flare or a 3-click flare. But on the other side, there are already some turntablists who say, "Oh man, you stole the soul of turntablism. Get the fuck out." But it is how it is, I think you never should complain about anything. It's all about innovation, taking another step forward.
It is. And sometimes it's difficult when you're in that particular context to actually see what the expansion is, or what that unlocks for future use. For example, going back to the drum machine example, from my understanding, people were really worried that this would replace traditional drummers, and that drummers would be out of a job. And the way it turned out is that it actually created a new sound, and it didn't replace what drummers were actually doing. It just expanded the landscape of what was possible and the sounds that people could make. And I think it's that same way with turntablism as well. That even if we look at the transition from traditional vinyl to Serato, the thing was that when it was vinyl, and you had somebody like Jazzy Jeff that was doing the vinyl manipulation with let's dance to the drummer's beat, that it was about, at that time it was about, my mom was listening. My mom has this record, and Jazzy Jeff is taking this record, this vinyl that I have or that I know, and is actually doing something brand new to it that I wasn't able to, that is just never been seen before. But then you make the transition into Serato, and Serato can now do some of these things automatically. It can, you can actually create, synced tracks on Ableton and actually just have record changes automatically, loop points, cue points, all of these things, which some people may see as cheating, but in actuality, it expands the
That's
the palette in a lot of ways.
Definitely. Yeah. Because you can focus on other things, like effects modulation and things like that. This is always what I say when they ask me, hey, why do you use sync? And I say, sync, it solves just a mechanical problem in a way, just to beat match the tempo of two songs. I mean, this is boring, There's nothing creativity in there to stay there 5 minutes and then to find the correct beat matching like back in the day. It
feels like these the softwares that are around for DJs and turntablists actually promote a development of more technical literacy. So you're actually you're interacting with the software more. And like Alex said, you've got more time to think about other things and more ideas can come to mind. Do you think there are sort of similarities between the mind of a turntablist who uses these sort of pieces of software and that of a more bona fide programmer? Do you use any kind of mindsets that you would be if you were making battle routines as to, audio routines, like as in like code routines and things like that?
I've never really thought about that. That's a great question. I would say that I think it depends on what type of programmer you are.
Sure.
For me, I think that I think of those things in a very similar context, because I would consider myself more of a product programmer rather than a very low level. There are some people that are really thinking about, well, if I do this one thing, this is one extra memory allocation, and that would be inefficient because of this. So I'm going to think of the most efficient way to actually write this code. And I think of myself more as almost like a feature programmer or like a product programmer, because of my experience, I have the ability or the experience to think of things from a user standpoint. So as a music producer, as a turntablist, there's a familiarity in terms of, well, the user would probably want to see this delivered this way. The user would probably want to see may find this interface more usable because of this. And I think that that's the same type of thinking that is involved in DJing as well, in terms of if you're DJing in a public place, there's a psychology that's involved there in terms of you're revealing and you're doing things to enhance or maybe even bring down the mood in order to like bring things back up. And there's this kind of wave that happens whenever you're doing DJing in public, and there's a certain creativity that's involved in that, where it's almost like user experience for when it comes to making software, isn't it? Because you have to bring the user on a journey, and that journey to me involves the same element of psychology, whether you're making software or whether you're DJing.
Right.
Just thinking about things from the user point of view. How is the user going to experience that? Now, I know a lot of DJs that just play their own thing and they don't think about what their audience wants to hear. But I always thought about it from the user standpoint. And when I play this and I do this certain way, the audience is going to react this way. I just have the sixth sense where I know that that's going to happen. And I think that happens as well in software, where I think, okay, if I create this feature this way and it reveals like this, then there's going to be a reaction there as well.
For sure.
Dopamine hit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good point about what you raised about kind of the way you approach programming or coding, because at least back in the day, you of course had limitations in terms of hardware and things like this. But nowadays, that I mean, of course, there's like really great programming, and if you're really I've also talked to developers who constantly are refactoring their code, and they will optimize things, but the product stays the same, right? So, from a user perspective, if it does something which is useful, then the code might be really messy. But if it works, then it ain't stupid if it works. So, from that perspective, I think you can get a lot of stuff done, and it doesn't need to be perfect under the hood, as long as the result is good. So there is some more, I think, forgivingness in coding nowadays than at least what it used to be, because then things would just not work at all or go really slowly. But it's good to keep that in mind sometimes. There's certain things that will improve the speed significantly, and at least with in terms of audio. Of course, you always, especially when you talk to DJs, the term latency always comes up, and this is to an extent also true in audio processing. In the beginning of 2000s, you got VSTs that were kind of processing stuff rather than doing things on the fly, and nowadays the computers are so strong, that can be done virtually live, so you don't really hear the difference, and it's being done on the fly. Yeah. It brings me to another kind of question I had, just to get your opinion on. If you think about graphics and audio, I guess mostly in gaming, but also in maybe movies, CGI and things. So graphics have taken major leaps. So GPUs are really strong nowadays to do photorealistic things. So people see movies and it really virtually looks real. I mean, if you look at some movies from the end of the 80s and stuff, you would have like this top frame animation and stuff, which really looked crappy. And then I think at some point Jurassic Park came out, and then Terminator 2, and then people were really seeing that, wow, this looks actually real, right? And that's really gone from there. Also for consumers, so you can play video games which look real. But the audio aspect is sort of has been lacking a little bit, I think. So you have 7.1 surround headsets and things like this, but actually humans interpret audio with only 2 ears. So there's not some initiatives going on with specific algorithms where they would only use the stereo sort of channel to generate more realistic audio in gaming, and for that, actually, these companies are like Nvidia, for instance. They're utilizing the GPU to offload some of that, heavy work, so people can actually experience that. And I guess my point here is that have you seen, or do you feel that audio developers are also looking into utilizing GPUs more in terms of just raw, hardcore strength of processing power?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I answer that question, I want to go back to the point you were making before, just about creative coding and optimization and that side of things, before I address graphics, which is that I think that when it comes to creating an audio product, it's important for the programmer to ask themselves, well, how long does this thing need to survive, and how many people are going to be touching this code, right?
Yeah.
If you're developing a DAW that needs to survive or has the intention of surviving for the next 20 years, you want people in there that are going to be concerned about, is this going to make an extra memory allocation? Is this going to make a copy of this huge chunk of memory and things like that? You have to have that. If it's a plugin that is something that may survive for like 6 months or a year, and that's however long that you need to support it, or it's something that's temporary that's going to come out and it's like a freebie, then maybe it's not so important. So it really just depends on what you're making, right? So, but if you're making something big, code cleanliness, documentation, all those things, I think are so important. I mean, like with my app that I've been working on for the past 3 years, I've probably refactored it completely, like 3 or 4 times, just completely revamped it. But that's because it's a huge code base, and I think like, okay, if I brought another developer into this, if I didn't do it that way, then it'd be completely unusable. It would just be completely unusable, completely unsellable in terms of like value as well, in terms of IP. If nobody else can use it, is useless basically to anybody else. But yeah, going back. So now going back to your question about graphics. Yes, this has been an area that I've seen a lot of movement about the question, and also companies that have been focused around delegating audio processing duties to the GPU, or even the thought or prospect of having those duties dedicated to a separate chip that would be an audio chip. And with those, I think the question is, one, is the audio processing so heavy now that we need a separate chip for this, that it needs another chip that's dedicated for this, as opposed to graphics, as you said. Graphics can be very heavy. And then also, what is the value add for the customer? So how is the customer benefiting from this bit of added tech? That, I think, if we start from there, what does the customer want? What enhances the customer experience? And then I guess like Steve Jobs has a famous speech talking about this, where it says, if you start from the customer experience and then you go back, you take a step back and you say, okay, well, now what's the technology that's needed to create that? Then I think that's the right path. But I think that there have been interesting prospects in terms of GPU usage or proprietary audio chip usage. Things like being able to take bits of DSP and have like marketplaces where you could actually upload different algorithms and have those stored on chips, taking the algorithm and then running the same software on a chip or as a plugin, and having the mobility to be able to port the same piece of software in a very modular type of way to a piece of hardware, or use it as a piece of software standing on its own. So I think there are some interesting prospects in that for sure. But it's a big space. It's all about, well, what's the value add? Like machine learning, same sort of thing. Some people start off with, well, machine learning. Well, what are the most interesting algorithms? What are the most how can we use this technology to create something for the customer? And I think there's a little bit of that, and there needs to be a little bit on the other side in terms of, well, what would be enticing to the customer? If we start there and then step backwards and say, okay, this is how we're going to create it. We need to use machine learning, or machine learning is the best approach because of that's what's going to get us to what the customer wants or what we think they want. I think that's a more effective path forward. Sure.
Yeah, those are good points. And I think to machine learning, I think, I've been in the business-to-business space for last 20 years or so. And basically in that space, you saw at some point big data was really, really big. And then it became data science and then it transitioned into machine learning and AI. And ultimately do all the same thing, trying to understand what the data tells you. So it's there's no silver bullet in a way, but at least there's more processing power now to do certain things, which I think is really interesting. With ultimately the goal to maybe what the users are expecting is more realism, and maybe there also the reason why you see graphics taking such a big kind of leap in a way is because that's visible to people. If you can see things which really look real with lighting effects and whatever 8K resolution and 150,000 frames a second, so it looks really real to you. The audio component is maybe less kind of less apparent to people, but it is still there. That's why we have 7.1 headsets and those kind of things to kind of try and mimic that, but it's maybe not so visible.
Well, I think what's happened there is that somebody needs to come out and really make a statement in what the value add is. If you could create a video game where I actually feel like I'm actually in that space, that is, to me, that is very compelling. That's very compelling. And if a company can find a way to do it without a crazy speaker array that's going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of space, or without a piece of equipment that is going to need to track where my head is, some big apparatus that I need to wear, or like some VR or even headphones. If I can experience that, like I'm actually in that space, then that is kind of the promised land, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then I think if we work backwards from there and say, well, how can you make that possible? How can you simulate that without the and make the budget reasonable for the customer? Then you'll be on to a win there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think some big tech companies are trying to do that, right, with Oculus Rift and Microsoft HoloLens and those kind of things. Those are mostly focusing on the visual aspect, of course, but they have a headset on, so it's obviously becoming more immersive. I'm a little bit skeptical personally about the industrial applications, but those seem to have some merit in there. So you can learn how to fix certain things or operate certain machinery without actually being there. You just have this thing on your head and doing things. I'm kind of wondering, just talking out loud here, that would sound engineers maybe do the same thing with it? They're kind of in a virtual studio and you have all of these dials and stuff, and not sure if that's the way to go in the end, but it's an interesting concept.
Well, like there's a company that I know, L Acoustics, who specialize in really large speaker arrays, and they actually do concerts for some of the biggest artists in the world, like people like Lady Gaga, and they do all of these things. But another thing is that for the sound engineer, the person that's recreating that space, that's exponentially more work for them as well. Just like creating a VR environment. Yeah, it looks freaking awesome when it's created, but the amount of work that it takes to create something convincing and something really great that's VR, and the amount of personnel that it takes to do that versus creating a 2D or 3D video game that you see on a screen is vastly different. And it's the same thing for sound engineering as well. Because the thing is that even if you do create, let's say in the context of music, let's say there is a technology that is very convincing, you still have to be able to fold it down to stereo, because there are going to be so many people that are going to listen to it in their headphones, listen to it in their car, listen to it just on their on their home pod. So it's the portability of that medium that I think is such a big challenge as well, because some people, they don't at the moment really think that that's such an important thing to have realistic sound. So
yeah, I mean, that's true, right? You can have all of these bells and whistles, but most people in the end up listening to it on their phone with their like €2 headset that they bought at some kind of thrift shop, because they broke their original ones, and it's that's kind of your audience, and that's how they're listening to it. So
I say so far, because who would have ever thought that we want to experience a phone in the form of an iPhone, a phone that is a camera, is a place where we play our music and these things. Nobody ever thought of that until the iPhone came out. So it was something where somebody kind of took a leap forward from a technological standpoint and said, hey, we need to take this and we need to really change the game in the way that people perceive phones and what phones are actually used for. And I think somebody or some entity needs to do that in the landscape of sound, where there's a step forward and they say, we're going to reimagine the way that people are going to think about sound, and we're creating, or we're presenting a piece of technology that's going to make you rethink that, where other people that don't have that technology are going to look at that and say, that's missing in my life. I need to have that in my life.
I think Kanye West actually beat you to that. We has the Donda now, so that's like the next big thing.
Yeah.
If you ask him.
Yeah. If you look at that, I think it's awesome because it presents another way for consumers to interact with your music, and I'm surprised that it hasn't happened before. But there, I always think in terms of what if there was a medium that allowed the artist or the music creators to present music with different variations, a different guitar solo, a different drum pattern, and things like that. Would users like that, or would users find that interesting? I think it'd be really interesting, so that like now we have generative music and things like that that are very compelling, and it's a very interesting space when you look at the things that are happening with machine learning, like Jay-Z synthesizing Jay-Z vocals with Frank Sinatra lyrics and things like that. I think once that's refined, it really makes it compelling. Then it becomes an IP rights question, doesn't it? Something for the lawyers, and hopefully they won't come in and ruin it all.
I think I read an article, I think about a year ago, where somebody actually had an AI and they took, I think, some piano scores, and they basically let it generate all of these pieces of music, and it sounded like classical music or something. And then they were saying, we're just going to register all of these songs as being ours. So then in the future, nobody can make any song, because then we'll say, hey, that's ours. We made this first. So there's also this kind of trolling element in there, which is a little bit dangerous. But I think at the same time, it's also, again, allowing people to be creative without the barrier. So they can do actually quite remarkable things. By just saying, hey, actually, I like the way this sounds, and I'll combine it with this, and then you get this kind of hybrid music kind of creation. And that's not only with music. I think you can also apply that to visuals, and things like that. So in that sense, it's very exciting. But I do agree with you that somehow the tools maybe for people to actually do that, whether they're students or young people, children, even older people who want to get a new hobby, where do you start? And that's actually something that we at Sxratch are trying to also figure out, that can we offer something in terms of the hardware space or even in the software space that will allow people to do that. So become more creative in terms of visuals or sound, without those quite high barriers of entry, in a way where you need to know music theory, you need to actually learn how to use, Ableton or kind of those kind of tools, and it's kind of daunting in a way. But I think there's ways of doing it to make it more easy for people, that whenever they touch it or do something or put in some commands or touch some buttons, that it will do quite remarkable things. And then, that will be sort of their creation. The same as if you pick up a couple of pencils and you start drawing something. It's always unique. And you don't probably need to have a whole lot of skill to make something.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is that everybody now is in a sense a content creator, more or less, unless you don't choose to partake in any type of social media. Everybody is almost their own media company, if you really think about it. And so the ability to create things that they can use to identify and brand themselves is quite interesting in the question of how can we make that easier for people to be able to create their own song that reflects how they may be feeling or what they would like to present to the world, and abstracting out some of those decisions that would normally need to be made in a conventional DAW like Ableton. It feels like the natural progression forward. It doesn't. Yeah, it does. Things are always, and I think that even the role of the music producer has really changed. I know that there are people that give tutorials and do different things on YouTube, and they're content creators, but they aren't necessarily music producers in the traditional sense, in that they spend most of their time actually producing music for artists. They actually produce content. They maybe compare different VSTs. They try to present these things in new and interesting ways. And I think that presents opportunities for the people who are creating these tools as well, because now you're creating tools that people are identifying with. It's almost like clothing in a way. It's almost like, well, what VSTs are you using? What DAW are you using? And then that is now becoming a statement about who you are as a music producer, or who you are as a creator. And how far can that be extended? Where you have limited edition VSTs that are only one of 100 and things like that.
Then you get into that are NFTs.
Exactly.
NFTs.
I'm the only one who can use this specific compressor, so this is now my sound. Need to come to me.
Audio programming on the blockchain, that'll be an interesting day. So we'll see what happens.
Man.
It's NFTs are also an interesting development. But hey, we're kind of running out of time here. I had one question still, which I was wondering about, because you obviously have a lot of experience in the sort of VST plugin space, working with companies and customers. If you look back at how you got basically rolled into this and what you know now, what do you think is the key thing that people tend to underestimate or maybe not understand if it comes to audio programming in general?
I would say number one thing is keeping things simple. If you look at the audio programmer, it started from a simple idea, making tutorials. I didn't necessarily know a whole lot of C++. I didn't know anything about Juice at the time, but the key to it was really finding something that was interesting, and then consistency, persistence, and overdoing something that was maybe one thing, but it was a very elaborate thing. There could have been this attitude like, okay, well, let's make this really elaborate chorus with this really with this whole web backend, and have different just make it put something behind a paywall that was big and elaborate and just really crisp and really clean. I mean, when I was doing my first tutorials, I didn't even have a mic. I couldn't even afford a mic. I did it on my MacBook Pro mic. And that's what I think stops a lot of people, is that they think, oh, I need the elaborate mic setup. I need the professional studio. I need all of these things. And to me, a lot of those things are just excuses not to get started. Frankly, it's really about doing something simple, but doing it to the best of your ability, and just getting it out there and iterating on it as quickly as possible. Like if you look at what you've done with Sxratch, it in actuality is a simple idea, being able to visualize scratches. But it was it was one of the first things of its kind that's actually been able to go out commercially to people, for people to be able to use, and you can see the reaction of it. So sometimes the best things are just simple and working, and that's it. Simple, working, consistent. That's what I find works most effectively, rather than huge, elaborate, and complicated, and not necessarily working. So keep it simple, keep it consistent, and just have things that are working. I mean, that's what I tell people that are applying for jobs as well, that are trying to get into their first audio programming job. They ask me all the time, well, what do employers want to see? And I'm like, if you're an artist, if you said that you are an artist, what's the first question that I would probably ask you, right? Is show me something you've painted. Right?
Sure.
That would be the first thing. That would be the first thing that I would say to you. You're a singer. I'm a singer. Okay, sing something. Show me something that you've sung. Right? Okay, I'm an audio programmer. Okay, show me something you've made. Show me something you've coded. I don't have anything.
Yeah, that's a problem right there.
Yeah. So I always tell people, make simple things that work, that have good documentation, that have clean user interfaces, that are readily available, that have nice, crisp presentation. Doesn't need to be complicated. Doesn't need to be the most complex VST that's out there. Doesn't need to do something that nobody else has ever done. Just something that works, it's clean, and people have access to it. If you do that, then that will give people an idea of where your level is at the moment, you know, and then you have a foundation to build upon, to say, oh, well, that code, I can refactor that, I can make that better, or for people to actually give you feedback on those things. That is so much more effective than, I've worked on half of a project, it doesn't work. But I've used these C++ templates and meta programming to try to do this thing. Something complicated that doesn't work isn't the way forward. That's not useful to anybody.
Yeah.
So keep it simple, keep it consistent, and that is the way. That's what's worked for me.
Exactly. Great. Hey, I think we're out of time, so thanks very much for your time today, Josh. And we have now the recording for sure. So that's good. I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future, but thanks very much for today. We'll link your channel and all those kind of things below this video as well, so people can check you out. Really, really valuable stuff there. If you're into audio programming, VSTs, all those kind of things, check it out.
It's also incredibly inspiring as well, just to watch you journalize and document your progression and your journey through all of this. It's been really amazing and fun to watch you grow.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's been a heck of a journey, and that reminds me that I actually need to journal more and let people know more about some of the things that we do. But it's something I encourage people to do, just to let people know about your own personal journey. You don't have to be a superstar, or, a lot of people think that they have to be on already, that they have to be at a certain level already. It's like, no, you just start from ground zero and you just build it brick by brick, and it's like anything else. It's like investing. It turns into something. It just takes time, and you got to stick with it. But thank you very much.